Hi there, and welcome to Incorruptible Mass. Our mission is to help you transform state politics. We know that together we can make Massachusetts policy reflect the needs of the vast majority of the residents of our beautiful state. And today we are going to be talking about how to answer the question, why are you running for office? We have a fair amount of experience here, and we know that there is a right answer and a wrong answer. There are many right answers, and there is one very typical wrong answer that almost everyone gives. So we're going to dive into that today. But before we do, I would love to introduce my two fantabulous co-hosts. I will start with Jonathan.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, an activist out of Boston, although I'm currently joining from the lovely city of Philadelphia. I'm visiting family, and I've been active and have issued an electoral campaign for close to a decade now in Massachusetts.
And Jordan.
Jordan Berg Powers, I use he, him, and I'm coming from Worcester, Massachusetts, Nipmuc land, and I have several years working on candidates and political campaigns, and so I'm excited about this conversation.
And I am Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford, and I have run a campaign, a campaign and a half, let's say, and I have done a lot of electoral work. So we're going to have a really good discussion today. So today's question is, how do you answer the question if you're running for office? Let's say you're a candidate, and people are going to ask you almost the first question out of their mouths: why are you running for office? So you got to have a good answer. Mm-hmm. And what, I ran an organization. We talked to many, many candidates, and we did endorsements. And so we had dozens of candidates that we spoke to, and we would ask this question. And I was amazed at how many people gave a very similar answer that is not a good answer. Guys, you've heard this kind of answer before?
Oh, yeah.
And this answer I'm going to call the rambling personal growth story. Right? So many candidates, they have their own internal reason why they ran for office. And that internal reasoning in their own minds, it starts years ago when they were in high school, when they were a child, right?
Or when they were born. Oh, they came out of somebody's womb. Love that story. Yep.
It starts years ago, and it includes, that there's some class they took, and,
their grandparents' occupation.
Their grandparents' occupation. It includes some girlfriend or boyfriend that they had. Who influenced them in some way. You're lucky if it includes a policy that they care about. And unfortunately, almost all of these rambling personal growth stories also have the punchline of it is why it is convenient for the candidate's personal growth for them to run a campaign right now. Mm-hmm. And when you're a person on the other end of that conversation, when what you hear is blah, 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 and you're really you're listening and you cannot figure out what this has to do with running for office. You're like, why are you telling me about the class you took in college? Why are you telling me about your ex-boyfriend? Why are you telling me about, they're like, what does your grandparents' employment have to do with anything? And then in the end, the punchline is because it's good for the candidate. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a bad look. It's not good. And people are going to ask you, endorsing organizations are going to ask you, mm-hmm. Journalists are going to ask you, voters are going to ask you. We're going to put a little pitch for canvassing. If you're a candidate and you're thinking about this question, we hope you're talking to voters. Anybody want to pitch in on the talking to voters part?
Yeah, you literally can't win elections without talking to people. And it seems obvious, but it's the first thing that ironically goes on campaigns. People are like, I can't afford it, or I don't have time, so I can't talk to people who are going to vote for me. But it is the only way to actually get elected.
I would also add with that, when it comes to having a really clear kind of presentation of why you're running for office beyond just simply who you are, because that's, I think, illustrates perfectly what you're saying, is that a lot of people answer why are you running for office with who are you, and they're not the same thing. And it's something that I've often thought about when volunteering for candidates, is the candidates that I find like the easiest to do work for is when I can either by given by them or by just kind of what I know about them, craft that story that combines a little bit of who this person is and why who they are makes them directly kind of aligned with current needs and issues, and that why who they are directly positions them to do work that is needed.
Oh yeah. So this is wonderful. You're like taking us right into the part two. Part two is, let's put to bed this part one, which is the story that so many people tell. And I have to say, I was knocking on some doors not too long ago. Somebody asked the question in a weird way that I didn't expect. She said, what is the thing that happened recently that made you decide to run right now?
Oh.
And guess what? Rambling person came out of my mouth. And I was laughing so hard because we feel for you. It is it's totally natural. That's the normal thing in a conversation with your friends, in a conversation with your family. That's the thing that's going to come out of your mouth. So you have to practice answering this question. And Jonathan, I would love for you to take this to turn to what is a good answer to this question.
Yeah, so like the one thing that I was saying before is that I'd like to ask candidates to kind of frame that in terms of like, what is the problem to which you're running is the solution, right? Because if you think about it that way, it directs your thinking much better, because it means, one, you have to actually zero in on the like, what are you actually trying to accomplish by being an elected official? If there's a problem, you also need to say like, I'm running for this office. Because if long rambling personal growth doesn't really tell, like, well, you could like grow personally by running for like school committee, for planning board, for Congress, and it's all the same personal journey. Right? Just the more expensive one, depending on the scale. But that really needs to be that there is something that you are trying to solve and advance and work on. And then to thread that where you also then need to say, like, to basically address why are you a solution to that problem? And also, why is that a problem in the first place, if it's not necessarily universally acknowledged that a problem exists, where you need to kind of elevate with a degree of urgency why that is the problem that people should be thinking about right now, as opposed to other ones, which you can often see in races where candidates will sometimes talk about how if a certain issue is the dominant one, they're going like, you're better if people are thinking about a different issue that's bad for them. And so you're kind of, let's say, elevating, it's like, this problem I am trying to solve by being in office, and my background, that like, whether it is my lived experience or my professional background, or if it's my volunteer background or other aspects, make it so that I can help solve this problem for you at this level.
Yeah.
And doing like that makes it just much easier to understand, because if candidates can't tell you, then there's not like, and can't tell you somewhat succinctly, especially because what's important to realize is most voters don't want to give you a lot of time.
Yeah.
Some of them want to give you some of them will like talk your ear off.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately that message as a candidate about the like, why you?
Yeah.
It's something that you need to be able to get for a candidate, like get on the doors with a voter very tightly, that you need that really tight version of it. You need a little bit longer of a version, and you need another step longer, because if you don't have something that can be condensed.
So give us some specifics. So like, you should have a 30-second one and a 1-minute one at least, and time yourself, practice these.
Yeah. And I think that's especially when people talk about like the elevator pitch, timing yourself and talking about things is super helpful, because then you can catch yourself if you start going into your 24, the rambling personal growth narrative. You can say, okay, I need to cut this.
Yeah. And so I'm going to give a little breakdown of like how you might put together one of these, right? Let's say a 30-second one, or a 60-second one. And you want to introduce yourself. If you're meeting someone for the first time, you got to let them know who you are. So that has to be part of it. And then, Jonathan, you're talking about, yes, go ahead.
I'll just say really quickly, but the who you are should be what's the thing that's most relevant to the job you're applying for, not like where you were born, what your kids are, where you went to high school. Like those are often where people start. Is they'll say like I was born in this place or done this thing, and I would say like, is that the most relevant thing right now? It's often not. Usually it's like your last job or you're an activist or I was a volunteer, hey, I do this for a job, but I'm a volunteer. That's why. And like, immediately, right? Like you want to get to the point, I think is also the other part in the introduction, right? To Anna's part.
Yep. Yep. And so this problem what Jonathan mentioned, the problem that you are suited to solve, right? That you're the right solution to this problem. When you introduce yourself, your introduction to who you are should be relevant to that problem and why you're a good solution to that. So everything should fit together. But don't forget to introduce yourself and say something about you, because really that's in the end, a lot of what they need to know about is you. And then the why you're running should be related. The problem that you're solving is related to the you. Does that seem like for a 30-second pitch? Well, what else did you guys add?
No, I think that's really core. It's that like making that handshake between like your kind of identity and background as a person and the needs of the community, so that you're connecting them in the mind of the voter, where they see you as somebody that shares their values and can actually like actualize those values into policy in the or change in the community based on kind of a very quick quick narrative.
I'm going to give an example, right? Just sometimes examples can help people. So you could say something like, I'm a construction worker and I've been a union member for 10 years and helped to, get to negotiate a good union contract. And our city is mostly working families, and yet we have not been able to get wage theft laws or, name a couple of things that you're trying to get passed. And I believe that I can help us to be more supportive of the majority of our city, which is working families. Yeah. Does that tie things together? That kind of story? Anybody else want to give like a little example that might help people understand how to put together one of these?
I'm a parent first and foremost, and I was walking by my kid's school and I was seeing that the river next to it was really gross, and I started to ask some questions and I got involved in some activist groups. And so I found that our city councilor hasn't been stepping up to hold these companies accountable for what they're putting into this water that I'm walking by and I can smell it. And so that's why I'm running for office, is we really need a solution to this problem, right? Like just, again, like you could tell a little bit about yourself and just like, but it's gotta be going to, it's gotta be going to something.
It's the way I kind of described it as you're like basically building a case for yourself, so that when you're thinking about like building blocks within that story should lead somebody's thinking along, as in the way when it's both where you're talking about like, and Jordan talked about like this specific incident, which then led for me to think about this issue, which led more to see how it's not being addressed properly, and then I could run, or Anna, we were talking, lead them along to like, I've been able to accomplish all of this, and this is a gap related to this that I see in the community that we need to do work on. So that like, it's even helpful to think about how that kind of leads somebody's own thinking along, so that they're following almost like a simultaneously logical and emotional path with you.
I love that. Logical and emotional. So the emotional part, that's why we're a story like Jordan had. These stories of like an actual instance of something that you were doing or you saw or happened to your child or a friend of yours. Like those things can also be very powerful. Awesome. Jordan, we would love to hear a little bit about how do you run against an incumbent specifically? Like it can be a little different running, for an open seat where there's like 5 other people running. You're, more going to talk about yourself and issues that matter to you with no comparisons. But if you're running against an incumbent, how do you approach that question?
Yeah, well, if you're running against anybody, you want to juxtapose yourself to them. You want to give people a reason why they should vote for you over your opponent or opponents. But and so you want to, and so that's a really built in when you're running against incumbent, right? They're doing something and you're mad about it and you've decided to run. And that is of like really ready made, like, this is the problem is the incumbent and I'm the solution by running against them. And that is a trap. That is a trap that most people who are running against incumbents um, do. They immediately start off the conversation. They'll say like, "Hi, I'm Jordan, and I'm running against this person," and they immediately go into why they dislike the other person, and that's natural. That makes sense. It even builds in this thing we just told you to do, but it actually isn't how people want to interact with you. No one wants to be told you're making a mistake all the time. That person that you've pulled the lever for or you filled in a bubble for, they are doing a bad job. People think of themselves, despite all evidence to the contrary, as good arbiters of who are good and bad people, who are people they should trust. And so they think they're making good decisions with the politicians they're electing. Even though people generally agree things aren't going great, they still think that they're making good decisions. And so while that makes no sense, it is how most people think. And so you can't start off a conversation with telling people that they're bad judges of character. That's not a way that because that's what you're doing when you tell them that they've been making a mistake about who they vote for. So when you're running against an incumbent, it's a little counterintuitive, but you really want to start with who you are. Who are you? Why should they trust you? What is it about you that you've decided to run? So you want to start your narrative in the same way with a positive story about why it is that you've decided to run for this office. And you actually want to avoid talking about your incumbent. You can say that you're running against them. But when they ask you, like, why, what did they do? You say, really, it's about me. I really want you to get to know me. And that's really important. Voters need to get to know you before they can decide to fire and change the person. They need to know you. And if the only thing they know about you is that you are not the other person, that's not going to be enough. The devil is just too much of a motivating factor in most voting life. So you need to introduce yourself. You need to have a conversation about what it is you plan to do. And your positive can and should necessarily set up the negatives for your opponent, right? So if your opponent is mean, doesn't get back to people, if your opponent is bad on women's issues, you can talk about the fact that you've been an advocate for women's issues. You can talk about how one of the core things you believe in is listening, and that's a part of who you are, right? That sets up your negatives against the person without ever mentioning their name. And when people ask you, like, oh, well, why are you running against this person? You could say, again, I'm really excited for voters to get to know me. And it's really important that you do that. You will at some point need to make clear why they need to fire them, but that's only after you have well established who you are, the values you are, and who you're running for. That's like late in the campaign. That's not the beginning of the campaign, but we often just run right into that.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is this, we're all in Massachusetts. If people are watching this who are not from Massachusetts is overwhelmingly Democratic. And so this for sure, I totally agree, in like Democrat versus Democrat races. What do you say about people who are in purple places where maybe they're running as a Democrat against a Republican incumbent, and maybe those people that they're talking to never did vote for that incumbent? It's hard, you never know, because often people do just vote. Like incumbents often are the only people on the ballot, so they probably just check the box, right? It's very common for people to check that box anyway. So I'm curious, though, if you're a Democrat running in a red place or if you're a Democrat running a purple place, do you give the same advice?
You give the same advice. You never start off with, this person's terrible. It's really a mistake. It's absolutely a mistake that people make. It is absolutely the wrong thing to do. It runs backwards, because again, the other piece that I want to highlight here is that elections are by definition about the future. You can't redo an election. Trump is currently going through this. If you listen to Republican voters, they are even saying, I'm tired of hearing about 2020, right? Like, you cannot run elections in the past. They are in the past. They are things that happen. You have to run elections in the future. So they have to be about the future, a problem that might exist now, but the solution is the future. You elect me and we will work on it in the future to fix it, right? So elections are by definition about the future. And that's why it's important to really accredit yourself to make sure people know why it's important that they have an opportunity to vote for you. And then you could talk about why are you the solution to this problem? And why is the incumbent not the solution to this problem? Or maybe they're creating the problem, which is often the case. And so you can do that after, but you really need to, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're running for. You always, when you're running against an incumbent, elections are about the future, and you really need to avoid just running a campaign against the other person and really work on what are the things you're going to do. What's your positives, Jonathan? Yeah.
What I wanted to quickly tag in there with is something that I feel like was a really apparent contrast on a lot of the 2020 Senate, like in the 2020 Senate races, where you had a number of candidates that they attracted a lot of like small donor donations and volunteers, but so much of their profile as a candidate was whom they were running against. So there would be like Sarah Gideon running against Susan Collins, or Jamie Harrison running against Lindsey Graham, as examples, which was a very different type of thing than like Mark Kelly running against Martha McSally in Arizona, where a lot of people didn't like. Martha McSally was terrible, but she wasn't like the front of mind as much in that race, where the others were like, a lot of it ended up feeling very much so like the opponent was like, and because people hated the Republican senators, but if your kind of persona as a candidate gets flattened to being I'm the person running against them, it doesn't do as much to inspire the voters who often may have voted for that person to vote for you, because they at least thought that person was good at some time in the past and don't have that same degree of negative feeling toward them.
Yeah. So I'm going to
Exactly.
jump in and say, if you like what we're talking about, please donate to the show. We're going to put a link right below. That would be amazingly helpful. None of us get paid, so anything that gets donated to us really goes to our graphics designer and our editor and our other people who like help to put this show together. So please do that. That would be amazing. And always forward it to your friends, forward it to your folks, forward it to your enemies, forward it to anybody. But I wanted to add one little thing about what you say about the incumbent as well, is that it should match what voters think of the incumbent. So if you happen to know that the incumbent kicks puppies, but voters think that the incumbent is like a charming, person who, they love to see at all these events, charm the pants off you, like you can't be like, he kicks puppies, right? You have to, what you say about the incumbent has to line up with what the voter thinks about the incumbent.
Yep, it has to be tethered to a reality that they can see. I want to say also another thing about this, because I see a lot of leftist campaigns make this mistake of making elections sort of zero sum, and that really also plays into this idea of like inviting like a future and incumbent. And so a lot of races are people sort of rerun the past and sort of tell people implicitly or explicitly that you're making a mistake with who you're voting for. And that's also not inviting people in to being a part of it. And so no one wants to vote for or join people who fundamentally they think you're looking down on them and telling them that they're stupid, even if the things they're doing don't make sense, right? Like we both hold that it can to want people to come along to these things. Like I care deeply about Medicare for all. I don't know why we don't have it. It's frustrating that we have this really dumb system of health insurance, but we're not going to win by telling people like, why don't you know this? You should be with us. Like that's not a winning way. And so, part of the thing about the future is you really have to invite people who aren't all the way there to come with us to that place. You want to have that thing. And I have seen a lot of, like, some people ask me like, oh, well, what went wrong? And besides the fact that, as Jonathan says, they didn't get more votes than the other person. So that's fundamentally what went wrong. It's about like people, did you invite people to come in who maybe didn't fully agree with you, but could get there? Because ultimately, if they vote for you, they're gonna get there, right? Like, because they're voting for you. And so I think that that's, one of the things I say all the time is that a lot of racists voted for Barack Obama. People who hold racial animus who say racist things, who then voted for Trump, right? Like but they also they had hope, right? They wanted to live in a world without racism, even as they hold racial animus, because people are complex. They hold absolutely conflicting beliefs all the time. We all hold conflicting beliefs all the time. And so if we're not inviting those people in, then we're not going to win elections, because there's not enough of us. There's not enough hardcore of us to win elections. We have to invite those marginal people in. And talking about the future, talking about who you are, like talking about a narrative that brings people in, that talks about the things you want to do. We're not saying don't believe the things or say the things we believe, but do so in a way that's grounded in people, grounded in their lives, grounded in the things they care about, and towards the future of the solution that you're going to solve in the future when you get elected and have power.
Yeah. And I'll just add a teeny little thing, which is like, you might want to be doing certain things. You might want to pass wage theft laws. You might want to pass housing laws. You might want to pass those things. But when somebody's at the door and what they're really concerned about is parking, you ought to be able to talk about parking, right? You got to come to where people are. Yeah.
Or just be honest. You don't know about it, but you hope to learn. Sorry, Jonathan.
I know it reminds Jordan, what you were saying reminds me of what I often say is that, let's say, like, that candidates voters don't need to to believe that they will agree with you 100%, but they need to be able to know that where you do agree, that you'll fight like hell for them, because that's something that comes across more strongly to them, where that they're willing to say that, like, I don't think that you'll do everything that I want, but because I have higher confidence that you'll do what in that area that we agree more than somebody else might. And that you can basically get them to emphasize different things in their calculus.
Yeah.
Well said.
I'm going to move us to just talk a little bit about how few incumbents get challenged, right? So in Massachusetts, it's like insane. We're like the worst of every state in the country in terms of like state reps running. But I know most places in America, incumbents are there and often never get challenged for years, for decades. I know somebody who, he's in his mid-20s and he was like, yeah, this is state rep, but it doesn't matter what office it is, right? My state rep has been there since before I was born and has literally not been challenged in my lifetime. Never been challenged in my lifetime. I mean, that's crazy. So we hope that this will encourage people to feel like you can run.
Yes. Yeah. I was recently in DC and I was depressed that most of the reps I worked for or were in there were still there. And I don't believe in I don't believe in term limits. I would say that elections are term limits. People should have a decision, should get to decide for themselves what they want. But the only way they can have that decision is if someone runs against them and raises our issues and cares about our things and brings it to voters, right? Then it's a real decision. They get to decide what they want for themselves. So I trust people, but people need they need like a choice between and not enough of us who share our values are running. I think that's the other piece, is like we need us to run. We need people, we need progressives to take people. We have the better ideas. People agree with us, especially when we talk to people about solutions to their real world problems. They're with us. They might not have the same language. It might come with racial animus with it, right? It might come complicated, but at the end of the day, the solutions that we have real solutions to the real problems that people are facing, and people want to vote for us. They want to vote for our ideas. You just got to give them an opportunity.
Yeah. Jonathan, I'm hoping you'll wrap us up with your advice on, a little humor on why people don't win. 3 reasons why people don't win.
Okay. And I will bleep out part, but not all of this. So the one thing that have been talking with a friend about before and would love like one of those feel good type, like inspirational poster versions of this is that when coming to any election, that the number one reason why somebody didn't win is like the number one reason why a voter isn't voting for you is that you didn't ask them. The number 2 reason is that they're an asshole. And that the number 3 reason is that you are. And when you actually think about it and take a step back, it actually does work, kind of matching to core parts of a campaign in terms of the reason being that you didn't ask them is about like your field program. Did you actually reach out to the right voters? Did you actually have enough, like a strong enough operation in that regard? Were there people that you didn't talk to? Did you misestimate who was showing up? The second one is sometimes that there's an electorate that's just simply not favorable to you, and that you would have had to like expand it more beyond what is reasonably possible for you to actually win because of the types of people who live there. And the third one is some people are just terrible candidates and nobody wants to vote for them.
Yep. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Great conversation with you as always. And thanks for listening. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.